At my son's wedding, his wife poured red wine over my head and said, "You got what you deserved." My son lowered his eyes. That was the moment I took the microphone and closed not only my wallet, but the patience they had built their future on. If I had stayed quiet one more time, they would have decided a father's dignity was part of the wedding budget. But the hardest part did not begin when the wine ran down my face. It began later, when my son tried to pretend the humiliation had barely happened. Listen to this story to the end. And if stories about family, money, dignity, and hard consequences matter to you, subscribe to the channel. I got to the wedding venue before the guests because I wanted 2 quiet minutes with my son. At 68, I knew how traffic worked around Pittsburgh on a Saturday afternoon. I was not early because I was nervous. I was early because once the music started, once the photographer began arranging everybody by height and smile, Mark would stop being my son for the day and become the groom in somebody else's schedule. Before I got out, I opened my banking app and checked the $35,000 transfer I had not sent yet. Then I checked the email draft to Gene Harris, who ran a regional parts warehouse outside Monroeville. If I introduced Mark as careful, Gene would give him a first small order another new supplier would never see. That was not nepotism, no matter how Karen liked to say it. It was a name. Mine. 40 years of calling a mistake before it left the shop. A name takes longer to build than a business plan, and it breaks faster. I read the email in the parking lot before I went in. It was short. Gene, this is my son, Mark Miller. He is starting small. I can vouch for his attention to quality on the first run. I left the last line blank. I had not typed my name yet. That blank line was the last thing still under my control. In my jacket pocket was an old brass chess king, worn smooth on one side. Mark and I used to play on Thursday nights at the VFW when he was 12. He always wanted to throw his queen across the board and win fast. I told him the same thing every week. First, look at what you leave undefended. He used to laugh and tell me I spent my whole life defending things nobody else noticed. The venue had once been a red brick train station, and Karen had made sure everyone called it historic. 2 women from the venue were moving a tall gift table closer to the entrance. A white card on it said, "Cards and gifts for the newlyweds." I stopped before I reached the door. My place in the day had already been marked. Mark came out 2 minutes later, but he did not come alone. Karen was beside him, every movement rehearsed. Behind them was her father, Dennis Brooks, smiling like a man who had already decided what the room owed him. "Dad, you made it," Mark said. He sounded relieved and trapped. I put out my hand first. He shook it quickly, then looked past my shoulder as if a missing vendor might save him from 2 minutes with me. Karen gave me her cheek in that half-inch way that made me responsible for seeming rude. "Robert," she said, "don't put your card on the table yet. We want the videographer to get the parents helping us later." Helping us. Not blessing us. Not celebrating us. Helping us. Dennis laughed under his breath. "Weddings are expensive now, Bob. Your side gets the fun part today." I waited for Mark to say that I had already done plenty, or at least that we would talk. He adjusted his cuff instead. "I need 2 minutes with you before this gets rolling," I told him. Mark opened his mouth, but Karen touched his elbow. "We can't pull him right now," she said. "The timeline is tight." I had worked in shops where a timeline mattered. But this was not a truck. This was my son standing close enough to talk and still waiting for permission. "After the ceremony," Mark said quietly, "I promise." He used the word promise while looking at Karen. Inside, a DJ tested the microphone near the dance floor. "1, 2, love and family," he said, and the speakers gave back a dry pop. My seat was not near Mark or Karen's parents. It was at the end of a table beside the aisle, close enough for a camera to find me when the gifts came up, and far enough that no one had to make room for me in the center. A small boutonniere lay on the chair. I picked it up, but a woman in a black venue jacket came over fast. "Mr. Miller? I'm Susan Pike, the venue manager. Karen asked us to wait on that until the photos." She said it carefully. Her eyes moved toward Karen, who was already pointing the videographer toward the gift table. "For the shot," Susan added lower. "I understand shots," I said. Susan gave me a look that almost became an apology. A good manager knows when sympathy can cost her. Mark stood near the old ticket windows, checking his phone. When he felt me looking, I raised 2 fingers. 2 minutes. He took 1 step toward me. Dennis leaned to his ear and said something. Mark stopped before the second step. That was when the first real coldness moved through me. A man can refuse money. He can delete an email draft. But when a son waits for another father's permission, the trouble is already past the gift table. Karen's mother, Linda Brooks, found me before the ceremony started. "Don't worry, Robert," she said. "Karen has everything handled. Mark needs that. He's sweet, but he can be a little soft. Mark does not like scenes," I said. "Exactly." She smiled as if I had agreed with her. "That's why he needs somebody decisive." It sounded like praise until I heard what it took out of him. The ceremony went clean. People clapped. Karen held her bouquet at the right angle, and Mark looked grateful to have passed the first test. I clapped too. He was still my son. For a few minutes I tried to let the little things go. The seating, the gift table, Dennis at his shoulder. Ellen, my wife, used to say that if you helped somebody, you did it in a way that did not make them blush the next morning. Then my phone buzzed. Mark had texted me from 20 feet away. "Dad, please don't start anything right now. Karen is stressed." I read it twice. I had not started anything. I had arrived early, asked for 2 minutes, waited through the ceremony, and kept my face still. But in Mark's phone, the problem already had my name on it. Near the gift table, Dennis handed red wine to a groomsman and kept 1 glass for himself. Karen pointed the videographer around. Here for the parents, there for the thank you, wide shot when Robert comes forward. She did not look back. People like Karen count on older men hearing and swallowing. Dennis came by my table with his glass. "Later you can say a few words," he told me. "Just keep it light, no shop floor speeches." I wasn't planning a speech. "Good. The young people need support, not lectures." He smiled at support. It had a $sign tucked behind it. I opened Jean's email again and stared at the blank signature line. The DJ was checking the microphone now with the same phrase, "Love and family, love and family." Karen turned toward me, saw the phone in my hand, and smiled as if she had caught me counting. I locked the screen without signing. When the reception started, Dennis took the microphone first. He thanked the venue, the florist, his wife, his daughter, the guests, the weather, and finally turned toward me as if he had remembered an invoice. "And, of course, we thank Robert Miller," he said, "father of the groom. A strict man, from what I hear, but we hope today he is generous with more than advice." People laughed because he gave them permission. Mark looked down at his plate. Karen smiled wider than the joke deserved. I lifted my water glass and did not stand. The DJ moved in quickly. "We'll have a special family thank you in a minute. Parents will come forward, say a few words, and bless the couple as they begin their new life." Bless the couple. Ellen would have hated that. She believed help should leave no fingerprints on a person's pride. But Karen's day needed fingerprints. It needed video. Mark came to my table at last. "Dad," he said, leaning close, "just stay calm." "Are you calm?" He blinked. "What? Are you worried about me or about the transfer?" His mouth tightened. He did not get to answer. Karen appeared beside him with a glass of red wine in her hand, held low near the skirt of her dress. "Robert," she said, loud enough for the first 2 tables, "please don't do one of your heavy pauses. This is my day." Mark made a small move, not toward me and not toward her. Just a twitch of a man who knew something was wrong and wanted the room to solve it without him. Susan Pike, near the service doors, lifted her head. Karen stepped closer. "I know exactly what you've been doing," she said, quieter now. "You show up with money and expect everyone to act grateful." "Not today." "Karen," I said, "put the glass down." Dennis took 1 smooth step back. Mark looked at Karen's face instead of the wine. That was the last second when my son could still have changed the day with 1 word. Karen did not put the glass down. She smiled first, and that was what stayed with me later. Not the wine, not the guests staring, the smile. It was small, practiced, and bright enough for the camera if the camera happened to catch her good side. "You got what you deserved," she said. The red wine hit my forehead and ran down into my eyes, warm from her hand and cold by the time it reached my collar. It went behind my ear, under the edge of my shirt, and across the front of the jacket I had bought because Ellen would have told me to look decent at my son's wedding. The room did not explode. It emptied. Somebody gasped. The DJ made a short sound into the microphone and then shut up. A fork hit a plate near the back. Wine dripped from my chin to the floor with a soft little tap that seemed louder than the music had been. I did not look at Karen first. I looked at Mark. He was close enough to touch her wrist, close enough to say stop, close enough to step between his wife and his father without making a fight of it. He did none of those things. My son lowered his eyes. In that second, something in me did not break. It switched off. I had spent years keeping one shoulder against a door because I thought family was on the other side. Behind that door were transfers, paid emergencies, quiet introductions, and the little lie every lonely parent tells himself: if I stay useful, I will stay loved. Karen waited for me to shout. Dennis waited for me to lunge. Mark waited for the room to move on without asking him what he had just chosen. I took a napkin from the nearest table and wiped my eyes until I could see the microphone. I walked toward it slowly. That mattered. If I rushed, Dennis would say I charged the stage. If I stopped, Karen would say I lost my nerve. So I walked the way I used to carry a finished shaft across the shop. Steady, both hands clear, no wasted motion. The DJ held the microphone against his chest. "Sir, I can smooth this out," he whispered. "No," I said. "It's already been smoothed too much." He gave it to me because he did not know what else to do. The room watched the wet old man step into the open. Phones lifted and lowered. Some people wanted proof. Some wanted not to be caught wanting it. "I'll keep this short," I said, "so nobody has to explain me later." Karen stood near the first table with the empty glass in her hand. Dennis had moved closer to her, not to comfort her but to frame her. Mark stayed where he was, between us and belonging to neither side. "The venue will be paid for the work it was hired to do," I said. "Kitchen, servers, room, cleanup, sound. None of those people poured wine on me. None of those people asked to be put in the middle." I saw Susan Pike near the service doors lower her eyes for 1 second. Relief is not always a smile. Sometimes it is just a person finding out she will not be made the bill for somebody else's cruelty. Dennis took 1 step forward. "Robert, don't ruin the children's wedding." "I didn't." My voice sounded quieter than I felt. That helped. A quiet sentence makes a loud room lean in. "I am done paying for the right to be humiliated." That sentence made the phones rise again, and I knew the first version of the night had just been born. "Everything I promised the venue under the agreement will be paid," I said. "I will not leave the servers, the kitchen, the cleanup crew, or the sound tech holding a family mess." Karen's face changed. She had expected anger. Anger would have been easy to cut into a clip. A bill paid cleanly was harder to use. But everything voluntary from me to the couple is frozen tonight. The startup transfer is not being sent. The extra add-ons put under my name as father of the groom are not mine anymore. And the email to Gene Harris will not be signed while my name is being used under a lie. Mark moved only when he heard Gene's name, not when the wine hit me, not when Karen said I deserved it. Not when I stood there wet in front of his friends. Gene Harris did what blood had not done. He brought my son back into his own body. "Dad," Mark said. 1 word, and still not the right one. Karen found her voice before he found the next. "Are you serious?" she said. "At my wedding? You are going to punish us with money because I finally said what everyone knows? What does everyone know? That you buy your way into Mark's life. The shop, the contacts, the checks. You make him feel like he can't breathe unless you approve it." It was a strong line. I could hear her profession in it. She knew how to make a room understand a theme. I turned to Mark. "Do you think that?" He looked at the floor again. "Dad, now is not the time." The time was before she lifted the glass. That was the first line no one in the room could pretend was about accounting. Dennis took the microphone from the stand beside me, but I did not let go of mine. "Robert," he said, smiling toward the room, "a man your age should know how to take a difficult moment without turning it into a financial threat." There it was. Difficult moment. Not red wine, not my son's silence. A difficult moment, like late flowers or a bad seating chart. I am not threatening anyone, I said. A gift is something I may give. A bill is something I owe. I am paying what I owe. Karen lifted her chin. Everybody hear that? He thinks love is a bill. No, I said. I think humiliation is not a receipt. A woman at the third table whispered, well, she did pour it. Her husband touched her wrist and she stopped. That tiny sentence mattered. The room had not become brave. It had only remembered for half a second that it had eyes. Karen heard it too. She turned toward Mark. Are you going to let him talk to me like this? Mark looked at her, then at me. His face was pale and I almost helped him. That was my old habit. See panic, pay for peace, clean the spill, pretend the apology would come later. Dad, he said, she's overwhelmed. The word hit harder than Dennis's joke. Overwhelmed made Karen a bride under pressure, and me the old man who should absorb it. Was she overwhelmed when she said I got what I deserved? Mark's mouth opened. Karen answered for him. Because you did. You needed to hear it before you bought us again. The room went still for a different reason now. Dennis reached for Karen's arm, not to stop the cruelty, but to keep it from being too clear. He knew clarity was dangerous. I could feel my hand beginning to shake, so I finished before the room got what it wanted. I am not closing my love for my son, I said. I am closing my wallet, my business name, and my patience until the people who saw this can say what happened without trimming off the beginning. Mark flinched at business name. Karen heard wallet. Dennis heard trimming. This is blackmail, Karen said. All of you heard him. No, I said. Blackmail is pouring wine over a man in public, and then demanding that he smile because he is a father and should pay. I handed the microphone back to the DJ. He took it with both hands. Dennis barked, "Music!" The first notes came too loud. People moved because noise gave them permission to pretend the evening had restarted. A few guests clapped, then stopped. Mark came close enough to speak without being heard by the room. You shouldn't have done that in front of everybody. Should she? He looked toward Karen. She was crying now, but she had turned herself toward the tables. Linda held her shoulders. Dennis was already at the wall with the videographer, one hand flat in the air, giving instructions. Mark said, "She's upset." So am I. That's not the same. He did not mean to say it that plainly. I saw it land in him after it landed in me. Susan Pike appeared with a clean white towel. "Mr. Miller," she said, quiet and professional. "There is a staff room if you want to clean up." "Thank you." As I took the towel, she leaned closer. I saw the order. Not the meaning. The order. Wine before microphone. Glass before speech. Silence before money. That was the first honest sentence of the night. I followed her toward the service hallway. Behind me, Dennis said to the videographer, low but not low enough, "Raw footage goes to the bride's family first. We are not letting a drunk old man's money tantrum get loose." In less than 10 minutes, the wine had become drunk. My boundary had become tantrum, and my silent son was still the only witness who could have stopped it easily. Susan left the staff room door cracked open. That was not an accident. A closed door would have given Dennis another sentence. Robert Miller was hidden with venue staff, pressuring them. Susan knew the shape of a lie before it arrived. She put water on the table, handed me another towel, and said, "Your jacket may not come back." I told her the jacket had already done its job, and she did not pull on the thread. My phone began buzzing before I had the wine out of my eyebrows. My cousin Diane wrote that people were saying I had threatened Mark and Karen at the reception. An old shop friend wrote that he had seen something strange in the family text. Then an unknown number sent an 11-second video. I opened it. There I was, wet and older than I felt, holding the microphone and saying, "I am closing my wallet, my business name, and my patience." The clip started there. No glass, no red wine, no Karen saying I deserved it, no Mark lowering his eyes. Just an old man with a stained shirt talking about money in front of wedding guests. It was cut too cleanly for a panicked aunt. Susan did not lean over my shoulder, but she saw enough from my face. When she asked if it was already out, I showed her the screen. She closed a cabinet with more care than it needed and said Dennis had asked the venue videographer to hold raw files for the bride's family first. The clip had not come from their camera. Karen had brought a short-form content person for cute reels. Cute reels. 11 seconds. And a family could become whatever fit inside them. The Miller-Brooks family group text was already moving faster than I could read. Robert, please go home. Karen, honey, breathe. Mark, get your dad away from the bar. Nobody asked why my shirt was red. Nobody asked why Karen's glass was empty. A short clip trains people not to ask. I saved every message. Not because I wanted to sue anybody. I did not. I saved them because a lie becomes easier to carry when no one can see where it started. When Linda Brooks called, I answered on speaker because my hand was still wet, and because I wanted Susan to hear only what was freely said, not anything stolen. Linda told me I needed to apologize to her daughter immediately because Karen was in pieces. I asked what exactly I was apologizing for. For threatening them, she said, for turning a wedding into a money performance. When I asked if she had seen what happened before the microphone, the pause was short. I saw you push her to that point, she said. There it was. Not an accident, not a mistake. I had pushed her. By evening, I would be drunk. By morning, I would be unstable. By Monday, someone would ask whether Mark needed to manage my accounts. I told Linda I would apologize for every word of mine that turned out false, and that Karen could do the same. She hung up. Susan had not moved. They're going to say you were drinking, she said. I told her I had water. She said she knew. I said knowing was not the same as being able to say it safely. She looked at the cracked door and at the paper towels in her hand. Her job was not to be my witness. Her job was to keep a wedding venue from turning into a fight. So I told her not to get me a file. I was not asking her to lose shifts or steal anything from the venue. That made it worse for her, not better. People prepare themselves to refuse a selfish request. They are less prepared for a clean one. She told me there was a raw sequence. Main camera near the DJ, security camera over the service doors, short-form camera near the gift table. She did not control those files, and if she asked tonight, Dennis would know. Then don't ask tonight, I said. She warned me that if they cut it, the cut would look real. I told her cuts usually do. Susan took a sheet from the printer and wrote the time at the top. Not a statement, not a report, just a private sequence while the night was fresh. Karen approached with red wine before Robert took microphone. Robert said, "Put the glass down." Wine poured before microphone. Mark Miller standing to Karen's right. Robert spoke after wine. Her handwriting was narrow and fast. She did not write attacked, abused, assaulted, or humiliated. Those words would invite argument. Sequence was harder to argue with because it did not ask for sympathy. I told her to keep the paper for herself. She said she would. When I asked what she would do if Dennis asked her to sign something different, she capped the pen and said, "Then I will know what he is asking me to do." That was all she could promise. It was enough to make her dangerous to them and not enough to save me. Before she could fold the paper, her radio clicked. A clerk said Dennis wanted an incident note and wanted Susan to list it as beginning with my microphone speech. Susan's face changed only at the mouth. "Now he is asking," I said. Mark knocked on the cracked door like a guest at an office. Dennis's shadow crossed the hallway behind him, then withdrew. That was smart. Let the son ask. Let the father look unreasonable if he refused. Mark asked Susan for a minute, and she looked at me. I nodded. She left the paper on the table and stepped out, but she did not take it with her. Mark closed the door and asked why I was making everything bigger. I sat down because standing would have made it too easy for him to imagine a fight. When I asked what exactly I was making bigger, he named the transfer, Gene, and the add-ons first. He heard himself do it and rubbed both hands over his face. "Karen is a wreck," he said. I asked whether she had been a wreck when she lifted the glass. He said, "Don't start with that again." Again. Less than an hour after the wine, the fact already had become something I was repeating too much. I told him to name what happened. He looked at my stained shirt and said Karen snapped. I asked what she did. He tried to dodge with "Dad," but I asked again. His jaw moved. She poured wine on you. When I asked where he had been, he got angry at the question, not the wine. He asked whether he was supposed to fight his wife at his own wedding. You could have said one word, I said. He looked toward the door as if someone outside might hand him a better answer. Then he said that if I restored the transfer and called Jean tonight, he could calm things down. Karen would apologize later, privately. Privately later. Money now. My name now. Truth sometime after it stopped costing anything. I asked why the transfer had to come back tonight if Karen was sorry later. Mark looked at Susan's paper on the table and told me not to drag venue staff into it. The door opened before I answered. Susan stood there with the radio in one hand and a blank incident form in the other. Dennis was asking her to sign that the disruption began with my microphone remarks. Mark stepped toward her and said, "Susan, please, not now." She answered, "Now is when he is asking me to write it." My son went quiet. He could argue with me. He could soften Karen. But Susan had brought in a piece of paper with a blank line, and a blank line is harder to hug away. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Karen appeared in the group text. Robert Miller ruined our wedding because we refused to live under his money rules. Please don't share clips until he apologizes. Under it, Mark's little heart reaction appeared. Not old, not accidental. Right then. I turned the phone so he could see and asked, "Is this later too?" He stared at the screen and found nothing. Susan folded her private sequence and put it in her jacket pocket. She would not sign that form tonight, she said, but tomorrow they could go over her head. I told her that tomorrow I would pay what I owed in daylight and get the bill separated before every extra became my punishment. Mark told me not to go to the venue office. When I asked why, he looked toward the ballroom, where the music was loud enough to cover a lie. Because Karen will say you're trying to embarrass her again. I told him she should be careful what she put in writing before morning. He left without answering. In the hallway, Dennis was waiting, not close enough to be accused, close enough to collect the result. That was how the night ended for me, not with the wine, but with my son's heart under a lie, and a blank incident form waiting for a signature. I went back to the venue the next morning without the stained jacket. The building looked smaller in daylight. Without music, the old train station was just brick, wet asphalt, and workers carrying flowers out through the side door. Susan met me near the office hallway. She looked as if she had not slept and told me I should not have come alone. When I asked who was there, she said Dennis, Karen, and Marcia Collins from bookkeeping were going over charges. I told her I had come at the right time, and she stepped aside. In the office, Dennis sat with a folder spread open like a legal case. Karen sat beside him in a gray sweatshirt, no wedding makeup, same hard eyes. Marcia Collins, the bookkeeper, had a stack of invoices. Dennis called me the man who ruined the reception and wanted a discount. I sat before answering. I was there to pay what I owed. Karen laughed once and said I still thought I got to decide that. Marcia cleared her throat and read the original venue agreement. Ballroom, kitchen, servers, cleanup, basic sound, standard bar package. Then she named additional items ordered after 9:30. When I asked whether that was after the wine, Dennis slapped the folder and said we were not relitigating my behavior. I told him we were identifying charges. Marcia read the add-ons: extended room time, late dessert table, extra videography package, shuttle extension, premium bar overage. Karen said those were necessary because I stopped the reception. I told her they were ordered after she tried to restart the reception around a lie. Marcia circled the timestamp instead of arguing. I told Marcia to print the contracted balance by itself: room, kitchen, servers, cleanup, standard bar, and sound. I would pay that now. Dennis leaned back and called it very noble, as if I wanted a receipt proving I was reasonable. I told him I wanted the people who worked last night paid by the person who said he would pay them. Karen said I did not get to separate a wedding into little moral categories. I told her Dennis had separated it when he ordered extras after the incident and tried to put them under my name. Marcia slid one page forward. It had the contracted items only. No late dessert table. No extended shuttle. No premium package built to keep Karen's reception looking untouched after the room saw what she had done. I paid by card at Marcia's desk. The machine approved the charge and printed a receipt with the venue's name and the original agreement number. I signed that receipt. Not Jean's email, not a startup transfer, a bill I owed. Dennis watched the paper come out as if the machine had insulted him. He asked whether he and Karen were now supposed to pay for the pieces I did not like. I told him he should pay for what he ordered. He said they ordered it because I caused a scene. I said his daughter poured wine on me before I spoke, and his family tried to start an incident note after I spoke. Those were two different clocks. Marcia stapled my receipt to the original balance page. The sound of that staple did more damage to Dennis's version than a speech would have. Karen stood and said I was making them look like beggars. I told her I was making the invoice tell the truth. That was the first truth they could not crop. Dennis changed angles as soon as the payment cleared. He told Marcia to note that I had refused charges after creating a public disturbance because they would need it for a claim. Marcia asked what kind of claim. Dennis said damage, disruption, emotional distress, his daughter humiliated at her own wedding. Karen lifted her face at that. Humiliated suited her better than responsible. I did not answer. If I argued damage with Dennis, he would turn every sentence into old man versus bride. Instead, I watched Susan step into the doorway with the blank incident form still in her hand. Dennis saw her and told her to write what they had discussed. Conflict began when Robert Miller took the microphone and threatened the family over money. Susan's fingers tightened on the form. She said no. The office went quiet. Dennis smiled without warmth and asked, "No what?" Susan said she would not write that. Karen told her she was the venue manager, not a therapist, and did not know what started emotionally. Susan answered that she knew what happened first. Dennis tapped the folder and said she saw an older man with a microphone threatening a young couple. Susan said she saw the glass before the microphone. Marcia reached for the incident form and pulled it to her side of the desk. The venue's internal note, she said, would include the payment timeline and the order Susan could support. She was not creating a customer story. Dennis stared at her as if bookkeeping had betrayed the family. That was the point of clean payment. It did not make people brave. It made the lie require their signatures. Dennis picked up his phone, and I knew the next signature he wanted would be Mark's. Karen called Mark on speaker before Dennis could. She said my refusal meant I would not pay for what I had ruined and told Mark to tell me. Mark asked if I was there. I said I was. He asked why I was doing this through people again when we could have talked tonight. I told him that last night his wife's family wanted Susan to sign that the conflict began with my speech, and this morning I was paying the contracted bill. Mark started to say, "But the rest," and I cut the sentence clean. The rest was ordered by Dennis after I left the ballroom wet. Dennis leaned toward the phone and told Mark his father divided family by receipts. Mark went quiet. I knew that quiet. He was looking for a sentence that would offend nobody and would therefore offend me. At last, Mark said I had promised to help them start. I said I had promised to help them, not the lie. He said it was not a lie, that everyone had been on edge. I told him to say it with everyone listening. Karen poured wine before I took the microphone, and he saw it and said nothing. Karen took the phone off speaker and told me to stop humiliating him. Him. She heard the mistake and attacked around it, saying I was tearing Mark apart because he loved his wife. I slid the paid receipt toward Marcia and said I was paying the venue and refusing to put my name under a story Mark knew was false. Marcia copied the receipt and stamped the original balance paid. The red stamp landed loud on the desk. On Karen's phone, Mark said something I could not hear. Karen's face hardened and she hung up without goodbye. I took a photo of the paid balance and the separate add-on sheet. Mark would get documents before another soft story. Outside the office, my phone rang before I reached the hallway. Jean Harris. I let it ring once because I needed a clean breath, then answered. Jean said he had received Mark's preliminary packet yesterday, and this morning someone from his wife's side had sent a strange message about a money conflict at the wedding and my support being pulled. He did not need family details, but if my name was part of the quality reference, he needed to know whether it still was. Karen heard Jean's name from the doorway. Jean asked whether he was on speaker. I said no. He said he was not getting in the middle of a wedding fight. I told him to do the right thing and pause the introduction. He was silent for 2 seconds before asking if it was that serious. I said it was serious enough that my name did not move today. Gene understood names. Men who work around parts and purchase orders understand that a reference is not a greeting card. He said he would tell Mark the first conversation was on hold until he heard from me. I told him to say more than that. Mark could approach later as Mark Miller, not as Robert Miller's son, if the work was still worth Gene's time. Gene warned me it would land hard. I said it should. When I ended the call, Karen stared as if the real wine had just spilled. She asked if I had called Gene. I said Gene had called me because her side had already gotten there first. Dennis came into the hallway and asked what I had done. I told him I had stopped my name from being used while his version was still wet. My phone buzzed a minute later. Mark had sent one line. "Dad, Gene says you're pausing me. Please don't do this." I looked at that message in the old train station hallway and understood that clean payment had not ended the war. It had only moved the price to the place Mark cared about. That evening, Mark came to my shop instead of my house. The shop was easier for him. My house still had Ellen's books, the old kitchen clock, and the dent in the baseboard from the year Mark rode a scooter indoors because it was raining. A shop gives a man metal, invoices, and fluorescent light. He can pretend he came for business. I stayed after the crew left. The machines were quiet, and the brass chess king sat on the shelf beside my old calipers. I had taken it from my pocket that morning and not put it back. If I kept carrying it, it would become comfort. I needed it to be a warning. Mark came through the open bay door without calling. He stopped just inside, as if he were not sure whether he still had permission to cross the yellow safety line painted on the floor. His first words were about Gene's email. No hello, no dad, no how is your shirt, your face, your night. He held up his phone and said Gene had paused the introductory conversation until he heard from me. Mark asked whether I understood what that did. I said yes. He said no, I did not, because he had worked 6 months to get that packet ready and had not asked me to run the business for him, only to make an introduction. I told him he had asked for my name. He asked what the difference was, and he meant it. That was the worst part. He truly did not see the difference between a door and the person who opened it. I looked at the brass king and remembered a 12-year-old boy who wanted every move to be attack. I told him the difference was that after he walked through a door, he stood on his own, but my name stayed behind on the frame. Mark paced beside the workbench. In the old days, he would pick up a bolt and ask why a hidden piece needed to be exact. Now he touched nothing but his phone. Karen had told him I was hitting his future, so he would come beg. I asked whether he had. He looked away and said he was asking me not to destroy 6 months of work over one bad scene. I told him to give me one honest sentence. When he asked what sentence, I opened our text thread and placed my phone on the bench. Karen poured wine on you before you took the microphone. I saw it and stayed silent. Not to the group, not to Karen's family, just to me. Mark looked at those words as if I had placed a legal contract in front of him. He said I wanted him to betray his wife. I told him I wanted him to stop betraying what happened. His phone lit, and he turned it over too late. I saw the first line of Karen's text, "Do not admit anything." He covered the screen with his palm and said she was scared. I asked whether she was scared of the truth or of the transfer. His face tightened, and he said I always made everything sound clean. Clean was not easy. Clean was the thing you chose after the easy lie offered you a chair. I repeated that I needed one sentence. No audience, no punishment in the text, just what happened. Mark picked up his phone, opened the thread, typed 3 words, erased them, typed again, and locked the screen. He said, I can't. He did not say Karen would not let him. He said he could not. That was the moment the supplier pause stopped being pressure and became information. I closed the text thread without another offer. Mark left the shop after 12 minutes and did not slam the door. That was his specialty, making damage sound polite. 10 minutes later, the family group text moved again. This time the message came from Mark. Dad came to the wedding already upset. Karen was overwhelmed, and he used the moment to threaten our future over money. Please stop sharing clips. We are trying to handle this privately. I read it standing beside the lathe where Mark had learned to measure 1/1000th of an inch. The sentence did not say drunk. It did not need to. Already upset was softer and more useful. Overwhelmed did the work for Karen. Threaten our future did the work for me. The first replies came fast. Poor Karen. Mark, take care of your wife. Robert, this is not like you. Somebody wrote that grief made people act strange, and I knew Ellen had been pulled into the room without consent. I did not answer. If I answered while my hands shook, Karen would get a second clip without needing a camera. I forwarded Mark's message to myself, then to a folder with the clip and the venue receipt. I named the folder Wedding Sequence. Not Karen, not Mark, not revenge. Sequence. Then Jean called again. Mark had sent him an email saying I came in emotional, made a scene, and that he was trying to protect the business from personal conflict. I asked whether Mark had used the word emotional. Jean said yes. I looked at the brass king on the shelf and told Jean the pause stayed. He did not ask why. He only said, understood. My son had not simply failed to defend me. He had written the version that made my silence look like instability and his dependence look like maturity. By 7, Diane called again. She had known me before Ellen, before the shop, before Mark was old enough to hold a fork straight. She said she did not want to get in the middle, then asked whether I had been drinking. There it was, wearing a family voice, not accusation, concern. Concern is a softer knife. I told her I had water. She said Mark said I was not myself. I told her Mark knew what happened before the microphone. She said Karen felt cornered. I said Karen had a full ballroom, her parents, a videographer, and my son's silence. That was a crowded corner. Diane sighed and said people were worried. I told her people were watching 11 seconds and calling it worry. After we hung up, the old habit came back hard. Call Jean, restore the meeting, send Mark a private note saying I understood pressure. Put the transfer back on hold, but do not cancel it. Give the boy room. Then I saw the brass king through the office window on the shelf by the calipers. Protecting a king too long can lose the game. I had taught Mark that and then forgotten it with him. I had protected his comfort from every consequence until he learned that truth was optional if I could be made lonely enough. I did not call Jean back. I did not answer the group text. I did not send money to prove I was still a father. Instead, I wrote one message to Mark. You have now put in writing that the problem began with me. I will not use my name, money, or shop to support that version. If you want a private conversation, bring one honest sentence. He did not answer for an hour. When he finally did, it was not one honest sentence. It was a plan. Karen thought we should all meet at the venue tomorrow, with no yelling. I could apologize for the microphone. She could say she was overwhelmed, and everyone could ask people to stop sharing things. I read it twice. It was tidy enough to be Karen's. Apology first, overwhelm second, stop sharing third. No whine. No, you got what you deserved. No son lowering his eyes. I wrote back that I would meet if the first sentence named the order. Whine, his silence, microphone, then money. Mark answered faster. Dad, please, don't ruin my future because you're hurt. That was the midpoint, though I did not have a name for it then. Not the whine, not the clip, not even Jean's pause. The midpoint was my son taking the woman who had poured wine on me, the family that had tried to write a false incident note, the group text that had made me unstable, and wrapping all of it in my duty not to ruin his future. I typed, your future cannot require my false past. Then I called Susan Pike. I did not ask for footage. I asked for a small room, no bar, no audience, only the people who had already touched the version. She understood before I finished and said Dennis would hate that. I told her Dennis could decline. She said he would not. I asked whether she would attend only if she was allowed to say what she saw in her own words. No files, no stolen copies, no secret handoff. Susan was quiet for a long moment. If she did that, she said, she might lose Saturday shifts. I told her she did not owe me yes. She said she had not said no. When I hung up, I looked at Jean's email draft one more time. The signature line was still blank. For the first time since the wedding, it no longer looked unfinished. It looked honest. Gene Harris came by the shop the next morning instead of calling. That told me more than a message. Gene did not drive across town for gossip. He came when a name had weight and a mistake could cost a truck or a friendship. He stood in my office doorway and did not sit until I told him to. By breakfast, he had received 3 versions: Mark's email, a forwarded clip from someone named Brooks, and a message from a cousin of Karen's asking whether Gene understood I was using business pressure to control newlyweds. I told him he could see why I had paused the introduction. Gene said he could see why I had to. He tapped the folder Mark had sent him. If he opened a first order under my reference while the family story said I was unstable over money, he would not be helping Mark. He would be putting my shop name, his warehouse, and Mark's first customer in the same mud. That was why I respected Gene. He did not pretend business was clean because it used letterhead. He knew reputation traveled through people before it reached paper. I told him I was not asking him to punish Mark. Gene said he knew, and that was why he had come. Mark could come later with a sample list, credit terms, and his own references, Gene said. But not under me. Not while Mark was writing that I was the problem. The sentence landed where it had to land. Mark could still build something. He just could not build it using my name as scaffolding while calling me unsafe. Before Gene left, he told me that if I held a meeting, I should keep it small. Only people who needed to know, no public revenge. I said I wanted no revenge. He said I wanted order, and order was harder. Susan called at noon from the venue parking lot. I could hear cars behind her and the tightness in her voice. She had been taken off Saturday, officially because the schedule changed, unofficially because Dennis complained that she was biased. When I asked if she wanted out of the meeting, she said no. She wanted me to know the cost before asking her to say anything. I told her I would ask less. I would not ask for files, footage, screenshots, or anything she was not allowed to hand over. If the venue had a formal delivery path, use it. If not, leave it. What I wanted was her own words if someone asked what she saw. Susan said that sounded simple until you were the one with a manager asking why a wedding client's father was mad. I told her it was not simple. It was clean. She answered that clean still cost. I told her to say no. She reminded me she had not said no. We agreed on the room for the next afternoon. No bar, no open doors, no relatives outside the wall. Susan would be present as venue manager only if Marcia approved the internal timeline note. Gene would join by phone for the supplier issue, not the family argument. The videographer could deliver any raw sequence through the venue's formal contact, not through me. When I hung up, I wrote those limits down. Not because I trusted everyone to honor them, because a clean plan needs edges before dirty people arrive. 5 minutes later, Susan texted that Dennis had asked whether spouses could record for safety. I answered, phones face down or no meeting. He wanted another clip. I wanted no stage. I sent Mark the meeting rules in writing. No speeches prepared by Karen, no apology video, no phones in hands. First sentence names the order of events. If anyone refused that sentence, I would leave, and the transfer, Gene's introduction, and shop access would remain closed. Mark called instead of texting and said it sounded like a trap. I told him it was a choice. He said Karen thought I was setting her up to look guilty. I said she had poured wine in front of a room. He said she kept saying I ignored why she did it. I said she could say why after she named what. He asked why everything had to be exact with me. I had spent my life around machines where a wrong thousandth ruined the part, and a man who said close enough was usually asking somebody else to pay later. I did not give him the lecture. I gave him the rule. The first lie was a clip. The second was his message, and I was not walking into a third without edges. Mark said Gene had already made his point, and that pausing him again was cruel. I told him Gene had not paused him because I was hurt. Gene had paused because Mark had attached my name to a version he knew was false. Mark said I was making him choose. I said I was making him stop pretending he had not. He hung up first, which was new. The old Mark waited for me to end hard conversations so he could feel abandoned instead of responsible. 5 minutes later, Karen texted from his phone. We will meet if Robert apologizes first for weaponizing money. I answered Mark's number, not Karen's sentence. I will be there at 3. First sentence names the order. No one replied, which meant they were coming. At 2:30, Marcia called from the venue office. The general manager would not release camera files to me, Mark, Karen, or Dennis. The venue could note that its internal review showed the wine incident occurred before my microphone remarks. The files would stay in venue custody unless a formal request came through the contract holder or a legal demand. Marcia sounded surprised when I said that was enough. Most people asked for the video. I told her most people wanted a weapon. I needed a floor. Marcia said Susan was taking heat for this and asked whether I knew that. The question was fair. A man who has just been humiliated can make other people heroic in his head because he needs them. Susan was not a symbol. She was a manager with bills, weekends, and a boss who could move her to bad shifts without writing punishment anywhere. I told Marcia to tell Susan she could leave before the meeting started. Marcia said she would not. I said to tell her I knew the price was hers. At 3 minutes before 3, Susan texted, "I am in the room. Phone's basket on table. Dennis unhappy." I wrote back that she could still leave. She answered, "So can you." That was not comfort. It was a warning. The meeting would not save anyone by itself. It would only make the second choice visible. Before I left the shop, I called Gene one more time and told him he would hear only the supplier question. He was not there to judge my family, and I would not let Karen turn him into a jury. Gene said he would stay on speaker 5 minutes, confirm the business status, and hang up if anyone performed for him. That limit mattered. Without it, the meeting would become another wedding table. I drove to the venue with no folder except the paid receipt, Mark's written message, and my handwritten meeting rules. I did not bring the stained jacket. Karen would have made it costume. I did not bring the chess king. That belonged at the shop, where a man remembered what a move cost. The side room was off the old station hallway, small enough that nobody could pretend to be a crowd. Susan had placed a basket in the middle of the table for phones. Marcia sat near the door with the venue timeline note. Dennis stood instead of sitting. Karen sat with her purse open beside her chair. Mark stood behind her, not beside me. Susan said phones went in the basket. Dennis laughed and asked if they were in school. Susan said they were in her venue and she was tired of clips. I put my phone in first. Dennis slapped his in. Mark hesitated, then did the same. Karen kept her purse open and said hers was off. Susan said it could be off in the basket. For a second, Karen's face showed the plan under the makeup. Then she dropped the phone in. I sat only after that. I told them the meeting had one first sentence. Karen poured wine before I took the microphone. Mark saw it and stayed silent. If that sentence could not be said, nothing else there was a conversation. Karen folded her hands, looked at Mark instead of me, and said, "This is exactly what I meant. He wants a confession before he will stop punishing us." Mark swallowed. The second choice had begun. Karen kept her hands folded after she called my first sentence a confession. That was her gift. She could make an accusation sound like a centerpiece set straight. I did not answer her first. I looked at Mark. "You heard it. Is any part false?" He glanced at the phone basket as if help might buzz through wicker. "Dad, everyone knows there was wine." "No. Everyone knows there is a clip of me with a microphone. I am asking about the order." Dennis crossed his arms. "This is exactly why we should have an attorney present. You can leave." He did not. People who threaten process often hate process when it is offered cleanly. Susan sat at the far end with the venue timeline note in front of her. Marcia had signed only the top corner, not as witness to my family, but as bookkeeper verifying that the venue's internal review placed the wine before the microphone. Gene's name waited on my phone, not connected yet. Karen leaned back. "Robert wants a sentence that makes him innocent." "No," I said. "I want a sentence that makes the room start where it started." Mark rubbed his thumb against his wedding band. I had seen him do that with machine parts when he knew the measurement was off and wanted the tool to change its mind. "Karen," I said, "you poured wine on me before I took the microphone." "I reacted," she said. "To what?" "To years of him buying his way into every decision," she told the room, not me. to Mark feeling like a child because his father always has a check or a contact ready. There was the frame, not a glass, not a public insult, but liberation from an old man's wallet. It would have worked better if the transfer and Jean's email had not still been blank. I nodded once. You can say all of that after the order. Did you pour the wine before I took the microphone? Karen smiled at Mark. See, he does not want truth. He wants control. Susan moved the phone basket 2 inches closer to herself. Small movement, clear message, no second clip. Dennis noticed. Are we prisoners now? No, Susan said. You are guests in a room you asked for. Karen reached for her purse out of habit, then remembered the basket. For the first time, she looked less like a bride defending a marriage, and more like an event planner without the camera angle she had counted on. Let's do this properly, she said. Robert apologizes for threatening us with money. I say I was overwhelmed. Mark says we all want privacy. Then we all ask people to stop spreading clips. That is not properly, I said. That is editing. Mark whispered, Dad, please. No, you wrote the edit already. He looked down. Dennis pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Since Robert is determined to conduct a hearing, Karen wrote a statement. Karen reached for it too quickly. Dad. That one word told me the paper was not meant to look like it came from him. Dennis set it on the table anyway. It began with, We regret that emotions ran high, and I knew before the second line that no subject would do any verb that mattered. No one poured, no one stayed silent. I pushed it back without reading the rest. If your statement cannot survive the first sentence, it is not a statement. Karen's face flushed. You don't get to grade me. I am not grading you. I am refusing to sign under fog. Mark finally looked at the paper. Karen, where did this come from? Dennis answered for her. From people trying to keep this family from being destroyed by pride. Whose pride? I asked. He smiled. The man with the wallet usually knows. That was Dennis at his cleanest. Make money the accusation, then keep trying to spend mine. I wrote one line where they could see it. Statement rejects order. Karen saw the words. Are you taking notes on us now? I started when the clip started. There it is, she said to Mark. He is building a case against your wife. I turned the notebook so Mark could read the line. No, I am keeping track of choices. Susan interrupted before Karen could answer. If this becomes an accusation about notes, I am ending venue participation. The venue is here for timeline only. That cost Susan another piece of safety. She had moved from witness to boundary. Dennis stared at her name tag as if memorizing it for a complaint. I put my phone on the table but did not unlock it. Jean is available for the business question only. If we reach that question, he will hear it. If we do not, he will not be used as audience. Dennis gave a short laugh. You brought a supplier to a family meeting? Your side contacted him before I did. That ended the laugh. Marcia slid the timeline note to the middle of the table. It did not contain video. It did not contain adjectives. It said the internal review and staff sequence placed the wine incident before my microphone remarks. Dennis refused to look at it. Karen looked and looked away. Mark read it all the way through and still said nothing. Mark, I said, you read the note. Does it match what you saw? He pressed both thumbs into the edge of the table. It matches part of it. Which part is wrong? I didn't say wrong. Then say right. Dennis cut in. He does not have to participate in your word game. He already participated in the group text and in Jean's inbox. Mark's face tightened at Jean's name. I unlocked my phone, called Jean, and put him on speaker without setting it in the center of the table. He answered on the second ring. Jean, you are on speaker for one question, I said. What is Mark's business status with you right now? Jean's voice came through flat and careful. Paused. He can approach later without Robert's reference, with his own materials and terms. I am not proceeding under Robert's name while the family version says Robert is unstable over money. Mark closed his eyes. Karen said, So you are helping him punish us? Jean answered before I could. No, I am keeping my warehouse out of a story I cannot verify, and a reference that the reference himself has withdrawn. That's business. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. The room changed after Jean left it. Not louder, smaller. Karen could call me controlling. She could call Susan biased. Jean had no family role to attack. He had simply named what my name was worth and why he would not use it under Mark's email. You brought him in to scare Mark, Karen said. Your side brought him in first. Mark opened his eyes. I emailed him because I was trying to save the order. By saying I was emotional and made a scene. I was trying to explain. You were trying to make him trust you by making him doubt me. That sentence landed. I saw it. Mark saw it too. And for one brief second there was no Karen, no Dennis, no venue. Only the old father-son room where the boy either told the truth about the broken cup or watched me find the pieces. Susan, I said, only if you choose. Susan folded her hands on the table. I was near the service doors. Karen approached Mr. Miller with a glass of red wine. Mr. Miller told her to put the glass down. The wine was poured before he took the microphone. Mark was standing to Karen's right. Her voice did not shake. That did not mean it cost nothing. Dennis turned on her. You are describing part of it. Yes, Susan said. The part I saw. Karen leaned forward. And did you see what he did to me for months before that? Did you see him holding money over Mark's head? Did you see him making us feel like every plan had his signature on it? I saw the glass before the microphone, Susan said. That sentence became the floor Jean had said I needed. I asked Mark again, is that order false? His face looked younger for 1 second. Not innocent, younger. He wanted me to rescue him from the exactness I had asked for. It is not that simple, he said. It is that simple first. Karen slapped her palm on the table. Not hard enough to be called an outburst, hard enough to reclaim the room. Fine. He wants simple? Yes. I poured the wine before he grabbed the microphone, because someone had to teach him before he bought us again. Nobody moved. Karen heard herself after everyone else did. Dennis closed his eyes. Mark stopped rubbing the ring. Susan looked down at her own note, not in victory, but to keep from showing how much that line mattered. I did not speak for several seconds. A person can ruin the truth by pouncing on it too fast. Before he bought us again, I repeated. Karen lifted her chin. You know what I meant. I do. And for the first time since the wedding, I believed everyone else did too. Before he bought us again, I said. And the words stayed on the table longer than Karen wanted them to. She recovered fast. That was why she had been dangerous from the beginning. Do not twist that, she said. I meant before he used money to control our marriage again. Mark has spent his whole adult life trying to breathe under your shadow. Dennis backed her immediately. He said every family had a breaking point, and that Karen had only named mine. The trick was clean. If the wine was a breaking point, then I became the pressure before the glass. If the money was control, then closing it became proof I had been controlling all along. I looked at Mark. Is that what you want to say? He did not answer. Karen leaned toward him. Tell him. Dennis added, Son, nobody is asking you to stop loving your father. We are asking you to stop letting him buy your obedience. That was a good line, and I hated that it was good. It took my money, my shop, my years of quiet repair, and made all of it sound like a leash. Mark, I said, one question. Did Karen pour wine on me before I took the microphone? Marcia moved the timeline note beside his written message. She did not speak. The two papers did the work. One from the venue, one from my son. One said order, one said story. He looked at Susan, then Marcia, then the basket of phones. Last, me. Yes, he said. Karen's face tightened. Did she say I got what I deserved? Mark swallowed. She was upset. That is not what I asked. Dad, please don't do this. Did she say it? He rubbed his wedding band. Yes. Did you lower your eyes? That one hit him. The first two could still be facts about Karen. The third belonged to him. I didn't know what to do, he said. That is an answer to a different question. The room was quiet enough to hear the old building hum. Did you lower your eyes? He looked at Karen, then at me. and the boy I remembered disappeared behind the husband he was trying to perform. I was trying not to make it worse. There it was. Not yes, not no. The corridor between guilt and convenience. Susan looked at him then, not with anger, but with the tired face of someone who had lost a Saturday shift for a truth the sun still would not name cleanly. Mark saw that too. I knew he did because his eyes left mine and fixed on the table. I opened the folder and placed his group text message beside the venue timeline. Then this was not confusion. This was your second choice. Mark stared at the paper. Karen reached for it, but Marcia touched the edge first and slid it back toward the center. No one is taking documents off the table, Marcia said. Karen laughed sharply. Documents? Listen to yourselves. This is a family, not a deposition. Then stop treating family like evidence only when it helps you, I said. Susan spoke before Karen could. My timeline and the venue note support that the wine happened first. Dennis pointed at her. Support, not prove. Correct, Susan said. I am not a court. I am saying what I saw and what the venue sequence shows. That honesty made her stronger, not weaker. No magic proof, no stolen file. Just enough floor that the people standing on it had to choose. Karen tried one more turn. She said the venue note did not show what she had lived with, and that Mark had spent years feeling smaller every time I offered help. She said the transfer was never a gift, because gifts did not come with a father watching how they were spent. She said my shop offer was a hook, Jean was a leash, and the wedding was the first day she had refused to let Mark be bought in public. I let her finish because motive matters. A person who believes her own license is harder to stop than a person who knows she is lying. Then I asked, if that is true, why did you still want the transfer sent that night? Karen's answer came too late. For Mark, she said. No, for the future you said I was buying. I called Jean back for the second time and kept the phone in my hand. Jean, status remains paused. Mark has now acknowledged the wine came first, but he still will not say his written version was false. Jean said, then my position does not change. Mark flinched as if Jean had touched him. Jean, Karen said loudly, you are hearing one side. I am hearing that Robert's reference is withdrawn, Jean replied. That is the only side I need for my warehouse. I ended the call. Karen turned on me. Now everyone can see what kind of father you are. Good, I said. Let them see one who pays what he owes and stops paying for what he is asked to swallow. Mark put both hands flat on the table. You are going to ruin me over one sentence. No, you are asking me to keep building under a sentence you know is crooked. I said the wine came first. You did not say your message was false. He looked at it again, and this time I saw the cost cross his face. If he called it false, he would be a son who had lied. If he did not, he would be a son who had let the lie stand after the room gave him a way out. I gave him one final, smaller door. You do not have to call Karen a liar. Say your message was incomplete. Say you wrote it under pressure. Say the wine came before the microphone, and you should have said that before you sent it. Mark breathed in. For 1 second he almost did it. His shoulders dropped, and the old boy at the VFW looked out from behind the groom's suit and the new ring. Karen whispered, Mark. That was all it took. He said, I am not calling my wife a liar in front of people who already decided against her. The second choice was complete. I gathered the paid receipt, the timeline copy, and Mark's message. I left the prepared apology statement where Dennis had put it. Then we are done with warnings, I said. Dennis straightened. Meaning what? Meaning the transfer is canceled, not frozen. Jean's introduction will not be sent. The shop corner I offered Mark for first inventory is withdrawn. Any optional wedding balance ordered after the incident stays with the person who ordered it. And I will not ask Susan, Jean, or Marcia to carry this conversation any longer. I said each item once and did not decorate it. The transfer had been voluntary. Jean's email had been unsigned. The shop corner had been an offer, not a lease. The wedding add-ons had been ordered by Dennis after the incident. I was not taking from them. I was refusing to keep giving into a story designed to make the giving look dirty. Karen's mouth opened. For once, No clean sentence came. Mark stood too quickly. Dad. No, the word dad does not reopen what the word yes refused to close. He stepped around Karen's chair. Can we at least keep the shop space out of this until next week? I have samples coming. That request told me the final truth of the meeting. Even after Susan's cost, Jean's pause, Karen's motive, and his own written lie, Mark still believed the practical piece should survive the moral one. No, I said. Call the carrier and redirect them to your own address. I don't have racks ready. Then rent racks. That costs money. So does using a father as storage while calling him unstable. Karen said, You hear him? This is punishment. This is inventory control, I said. My shop will not receive goods for a business whose first public statement makes my name a liability. Mark's face changed at liability. It was a word he understood from forms, leases, and insurance boxes. For the first time, he heard my boundary in a language he could not dismiss as hurt. Susan pushed the phone basket toward them. Meeting is over. Marcia gathered the venue papers and kept Susan's timeline note with the office copy. The venue is not releasing footage today, she said. The internal note stands as written. Dennis started to object, but Marcia closed the folder before he found the sentence. Dennis grabbed his phone and pointed at me. This is not finished. It is for my wallet, I said, and for my name. I left before Karen could turn the ending into another clip. In the hallway, I heard Mark say my name once. Not Dad. Robert. It told me exactly whose room he was still standing in. I did not cancel the transfer in the meeting room. I waited until I was back in my truck, parked under the black canopy of the old station, where no one could say I had done it for an audience. The banking app still showed the scheduled transfer as pending setup. $35,000. A number large enough to start Mark's small parts business and small enough, in Karen's mouth, to become proof I had wanted ownership. I opened the transfer, selected cancel, read the confirmation twice, and pressed it. The screen asked if I was sure. I was not sure of anything soft. I was sure of this. Cancelled. I took a screenshot for my records and did not send it to Mark. A consequence does not need fireworks to become real. Next, I opened Jean's email draft. Jean, this is my son Mark Miller. He is starting small. I can vouch for his attention to quality on the first run. The signature line was blank. I selected the draft and deleted it. The phone asked if I wanted to discard the message. I did. Then I called Jean and told him the introduction would not be sent. Mark could approach later without my name, with his own terms, samples, and credit. Jean said he understood and would keep the door professionally narrow, not personally shut. That was more mercy than Mark had earned from the version he wrote. The third call went to my shop foreman, Bill. I told him the corner bay we had discussed for Mark's first inventory was no longer available. If a carrier arrived with Miller supply samples, it should be refused unless the delivery was addressed to my shop under our purchase order. Bill asked one useful question. Should he tell Mark or just refuse the truck? I told him to tell Mark once, then refuse the truck. That was the hard part of clean consequence. You have to make it boring enough to work. By the time I pulled out of the venue lot, Karen had already sent a message from her own number. You canceled the transfer? After everything? Now everyone sees who you are. I answered once. Yes, I canceled a voluntary gift after a public humiliation, a cropped clip, a false written version, and a refused second chance. Venue obligations are paid. She sent 3 typing bubbles, then nothing. The receipt had ruined the easiest accusation. Mark called before I reached the river road. I let it ring because I knew his first voice would be panic, and I did not owe panic the wheel. When I parked by the shop, I called him back. He asked me to tell him I had not canceled it. I said I had. He said I was punishing him for being married. I said I was refusing to fund a version where my money was dirty until he needed it. He said Karen was crying. I said Karen cried facing the room, and he went silent because that one landed too close to the wedding. When Mark asked what he was supposed to do about Jean, I told him to approach Jean without my name. He said Jean would not take him seriously. I told him to become serious enough. He said I knew that was not how it worked. I told him it was how it worked now. Then he raised his voice and said I was ruining his first order. I answered that I was removing the cover he had used while calling me unstable. He said he had been trying to protect his wife. I said he had protected her by writing that I was the problem. He said he had been trying to keep the peace. I told him he had kept the peace on top of me. He had no answer that would stand up. When I entered the shop office, the brass king was still on the shelf. I moved it 2 inches to the left, beside the calipers, where I would see it before I signed anything for anyone again. The next morning, Bill called from the receiving bay. A courier had arrived with 2 sample boxes addressed to Mark Miller, care of Miller Precision. Mark was with him. I asked Bill to put him on. Mark's voice came through tight. The samples were already there, he said. Please just let them sit in the corner for a week. I said no. He said it was 2 boxes. I said they were easy to redirect. He said I was making him look like an idiot in front of the courier. I said he had made me look unstable in front of a supplier. Mark lowered his voice and said, Karen thought I wanted him to crawl. I told him Karen said many useful things when she wanted my resources. He told me not to talk about his wife like that. I told him to stop asking me to finance the version she built. Bill came back on the phone and asked if he should refuse the shipment. I said yes. I heard the word pass from Bill to the driver. I heard the metal wheels of the hand truck turn back toward the bay door. That sound was small. It was also the first time Mark's future had to move without my floor under it. An hour later, Dennis left a voicemail saying they would review options for the emotional and financial harm I had caused. I saved it because every threat has a date and a voice. Marcia emailed the paid original balance receipt and the separated add-on sheet. Susan's name was not on the email. Good. The less they could aim at her, the better. Jean emailed Mark, copying me only on the final line. Robert Miller's reference is not active. You may submit independent materials for future review. That sentence was not cruel. It was a closed gate with a road beside it. Karen posted nothing public. That told me more than a post would have. Public outrage needed a cleaner victim than a bride who had admitted she poured wine to teach a man before he bought them again. Instead, the family group text slowed into little coughs. A cousin asking if everyone was all right. Linda saying people needed grace. Diane sending me a private heart and then deleting it before I could answer. Mark texted once that night. I hope you're happy. I wrote back, I am not happy. I am finished paying for silence. He did not answer. The next 2 days brought practical consequences, not dramatic ones. The venue sent Dennis a clean add-on balance. The shuttle company called Karen, not me. The dessert invoice went to the Brooks address. Bill updated the receiving log so Mark's company could not be entered as a care-of delivery. Jean's assistant removed my name from Mark's supplier notes. None of it shouted. All of it held. My credit union called to confirm that the canceled transfer was not a mistake because the amount was large and had been prepared in advance. I told the woman on the phone it was not a mistake. She asked if I wanted to schedule a new transfer date. I said no. That no sounded ordinary to her. It sounded final to me. Diane called again, but this time she did not ask whether I had been drinking. She said Mark had told relatives that I had pulled every bit of help at once. I told her I had paid the venue, canceled a voluntary transfer, withdrawn an unsigned reference, and refused to receive inventory for a company that had used my name under a false story. Diane was quiet long enough to hear the difference. Then she said, "That is not the version going around." I said I knew. Bill showed me the receiving log after the refused boxes. Mark had written Miller Precision as care-of address on the sample paperwork 2 weeks before the wedding. That meant the shop space had not been a last-minute favor. It had been part of the plan Karen later called control. I photographed the log entry and put it with the wedding sequence folder. Not to attack Mark, to remind myself that the wallet had been opened before the respect was decided. Jean forwarded a short note from Mark asking whether an independent review could happen once tempers cooled. Jean had not answered yet. He asked me whether I objected. I said no. Mark could build if he came without my name. The consequence was not a wall across his life. It was the removal of a bridge he had tried to burn while standing on it. On the third day, Mark sent a longer message and then deleted it before I opened it. On the fourth, he sent only, "Can I come by without Karen?" I answered, "You can come by." The first honest sentence still comes first. He did not answer yes. He did not answer no. That afternoon, Bill knocked on my office glass and pointed toward the road outside the shop. Mark was there without Karen, without sample boxes, and without his phone raised. I looked at the brass king on the shelf and went outside, knowing the hardest consequence was not the money I had canceled. It was the conversation I could no longer buy my way around. Mark waited by the bus stop at the edge of the industrial strip like a man who had arrived too early for a job interview and too late for a family. He wore the same dark jacket from the shop visit. No tie, no sample boxes, no Karen in the car behind him. That mattered, but not enough to open the old door by itself. I walked out without hurrying. Bill stayed inside and pretended to check a packing slip, but I could feel the shop watching through the glass. Mark looked thinner than he had 4 days earlier. He said, "Dad," using the old key. I stopped 2 steps away and told him that if that was the first honest sentence, we were done already. He flinched and asked if we could not start like that. I told him we had started at the wedding and were only deciding whether to keep lying about where. He looked down the road while trucks moved past the strip lots. Then he said Karen was at her mother's. I told him that was information, not truth. He said she was angry. I said I knew. He said she thought I had made her look like a monster. I told him she had poured wine over my head and said I got what I deserved. I had not invented her. Mark pushed both hands into his pockets and said he should have stopped it. I waited. He said he should have said something. I waited again. The first 2 sentences were close. Close is useful for parking, not for a life built on a lie. Finally, he said, "I saw her pour the wine before you took the microphone." I lowered my eyes. Then I wrote it like you were the problem. The road noise kept going. The shop kept humming behind me. Nothing in the world changed except the one thing I had asked him to stop hiding. I told him that was the first honest sentence. Relief broke across his face too fast, and that told me what he expected next. The old sequence, where truth and pain brought my hand back to the wallet. I told him the sentence did not reopen the wallet, Jean, the shop corner, or the transfer. He said he knew, but he did not know yet. When he asked what the sentence did, I told him it made the conversation possible. Possible was a smaller word than he had come for. He said he was losing the order. I told him he had lost the shortcut. He said that was easy for me to say because I already had a shop. I told him I had a shop because men believed my name after watching me work for 40 years, and he had tried to borrow that name while writing that I could not be trusted. Those 2 things could not stand together. He sat on the low concrete wall by the bus stop. For a moment he looked 12 again, angry at a chessboard because the move he wanted would expose the king. He said he did not know how to fix it. I told him good. Knowing he did not know was better than asking me to pay so he never had to learn. He said Karen believed that if he admitted too much, everyone would blame her forever. I asked who everyone was. Her parents, his friends, people at the wedding. I asked about him. He had no quick answer. I told him that if Karen could only stay his wife while he lied about what she did to his father, then the marriage was not protected by the lie. It was built on it. He asked if I was telling him to leave her. I said no. I was telling him I would not be the floor under either choice. A truck passed, and for 3 seconds we could not hear each other. I was grateful for that. Silence kept me from softening the sentence too early. Mark asked if he could come inside. The shop door was behind me. Once that door had been nothing. Mark walked through it with coffee, questions, and parts he did not understand. After the wedding, it had become a resource, and every resource had to be renamed. I said not today. Then I asked, as what? He did not understand at first. If he came inside later, as what? He said as my son. I told him that was not enough if son meant the man who used the shop and wrote the lie. After a long breath, he said, then as a guest. I told him that was better. The word hurt him. It hurt me too. A guest knocks, a guest waits, A guest does not assume the back room, the spare key, the empty bay, or the old name. He asked when. I said when he could come without needing a check, a corner, or a call from me. When he asked about Karen, I told him Karen could write her own sentence to me or not. I was not meeting her through him anymore. He asked about Jean. I told him to send Jean the packet without my name. If Jean said no, improve the packet. If Jean said later, wait. If Jean said never, find another supplier. Mark said that could take months and might fail. I said yes to both. He almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. He understood then that I really was not going to save it. Mark said he did not know what to tell Karen. I told him to tell her the order. He said she would hate that. I said to tell it once and see what remained. Then he asked the question under all the others, whether I hated him. A child can be 40 and still ask it with his shoulders. I told him no, but I would not buy my way out of hating what he did. That answer did not comfort him. It was not meant to. Comfort had become too expensive in our family because I had been paying for it with truth. He asked if he could call me and whether I would answer. I said yes, if the call was not about money first. He nodded and walked toward his car, which was parked half a block away, not in my lot. That small distance told me he had learned at least one thing before coming. I went back inside after he drove away. Bill did not ask how it went. He only said the coffee was still warm. I thanked him and went to my office. The brass chess king sat beside the calipers where I had left it. I picked it up, felt the worn side under my thumb, and set it back on the open shelf instead of putting it in my pocket. The king did not need to travel with me anymore. For years, I had thought fatherhood meant standing in front of every blow before it reached my son. Then I learned a harder thing. Sometimes the blow is the truth he has been avoiding, and if I keep stepping in front of it, I become the lie's servant. The transfer stayed canceled. Jean's email stayed deleted. The shop corner stayed empty until another customer rented it at the regular rate. The family group text never became warm again. Diane called once a week for a while and learned not to ask if I was ready to move on. Moving on is what people call it when they want the injured person to carry the broken piece quietly. Mark called 6 days later. The first thing he said was not Dad. It was, I sent Jean my own packet. I said good. Jean had asked for revisions. I told him to revise. He did not ask me to call. That was not reconciliation. It was not forgiveness. It was a road. 2 weeks after that, he stopped by the shop during lunch and knocked on the glass before entering. He brought no invoices, no boxes, no request. He stood by the door and said Karen still believed I had humiliated her. I said Karen was allowed to keep her story outside my shop. Mark nodded and did not defend it. That was new. He asked if he could look at the old inspection table for 10 minutes because he was reworking a sample sheet. I said yes, as a guest, and he signed the visitor log Bill kept by the door. It was a small humiliation for him and a necessary mercy for me. When he left, he thanked Bill before he thanked me. Bill told him good luck like he would tell any young supplier trying not to embarrass himself. I watched Mark hear the ordinary tone and realized that ordinary respect was still available if he came without entitlement. As for Karen, she never wrote the sentence. Maybe she never could. Maybe in her story, the wine would always be a lesson, and my canceled money would always be cruelty. I stopped trying to live inside her story. Sometimes people ask what I lost. I lost the easy version of my son. I lost the habit of being needed before being respected. I lost the comfort of pretending silence was patience. What I kept was smaller and harder. My name, my wallet, and one honest sentence at the door. And the brass king stayed on the shelf, not in my pocket, where every man who entered the shop could see it before making a move.